I want to thank you for coming this afternoon to this press conference, which we are calling to urge the passage of the Private Property Rights Act of 2012. The bill is known as H.R. 1433, and it was passed by the House on February 28, 2012, and is now before the Senate. It is presently before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Willets Point United urges New York Senators Schumer and Gillibrand to move the bill to the full Senate for approval. Property owners all over the state of New York have no rights to their family's property. We've seen real property owned by families and small businesses taken for economic development, and in some instances, especially in Brooklyn, sold to Russian billionaires. Does this sound like this should be happening in America? Make no mistake, the proposed condemnation of Willets Point represents the clear discrimination of minorities and women. It's outrageous that the mayor of the city of New York should act in such an abusive way towards small businesses that are owned by Hispanics trying to live the American dream. Passing the Private Property Rights Protection Act of 2012 will stop the condemnation of Willets Point, and it will stop eminent domain abuse in New York State.
The American dream has always been about owning your own home, owning your own business. And what the city of New York is doing here is the opposite. Taking somebody's home and business who they've worked generations to build up and to give it to some other private entity, in this case, a very rich developer. I am pleased that the House of Representatives passed legislation to sort of end this practice. And I certainly call upon my colleagues in the U.S. Senate to pass the bill, and the President to sign it into law. There was actually legislation in the state Senate introduced by my colleague, State Senator Perkins, to do the same thing in New York State. I'm a co-sponsor of that bill. We have to put an end, once and for all, about the abuse of eminent domain. It was always intended that you would only take private property for a real public purpose. A school, a road. That's not what this is about, and that's not what the city has been doing under the Bloomberg administration. They're taking businesses to give to another private business, in this case, a very rich, one or two very rich, well-connected, politically connected developers. It's not only un-American, it's an absolute disgrace. I stand with Willets Point United, as I have well before I was ever elected to public office. What the city should be doing here, put in the infrastructure, and development will take care of itself. But what the city's going to do is put the infrastructure in and help the developer. I mean, this is absolutely absurd. So I say to the U.S. Senate, let's pass this legislation. Let's have the President sign it into law. Let's have the New York State Legislature pass Perkins and my bill. And let's help the people here and preserve these generation-owned businesses and protect the minority-owned and women-owned businesses. And I send a message to Mike Bloomberg, you know what? We're going to fight you and your rich friends from doing what you're doing here, because it's about the people and not about your rich, connected friends.
Look, first let me commend my predecessor in the council. Senator Avella and I don't always agree on things, but this is one fight that he has been fighting for a very long time. And these communities cannot continue to live under the yoke of a government that can arbitrarily and capriciously come in and take their property for any use whatsoever. I commend the Republican-led U.S. Congress, the House that passed this bill, and I urge the Democrats in the United States Senate to stop buying the party line. You have to get this bill out of committee. You have to let it go to the floor. And we need to see the votes in the U.S. Senate. Who is on our side? Senators Gillibrand and Schumer are people who should understand the values of New Yorkers. They represent us in the Senate. They have an obligation to make sure this bill gets to the floor to curb this type of abuse. And each one of these small business owners has family, and their families are suffering because of what the city is doing right here, right now. It's completely unacceptable that our government can take from some of its citizens to give to other citizens without there being a justification. In this instance, Willets Point was neglected for 40 years by the city's infrastructure division. There were no sewer lines put in. Department of Transportation did not come in and pave the roads. DDC did not do its job of upkeeping the blocks. And then the city turns around and says to them they are blighted businesses worthy of condemnation. But that's okay, because they can relocate them to my corporate park at College Point and they'll be fine there. This is utter hypocrisy. The government is either of and for the people or it's not. This abuse of eminent domain shows clearly our government is not of, by, and for its people. Because if it was, the men and women here from every walk of life, every race, every ethnicity, both genders, are here today because their families will suffer as a result of this illegal action. The Kelo decision was a bad decision. In fact, the Supreme Court justice who was the swing vote on it, just 6 months later said, I made a mistake. If that doesn't tell you there's a problem at the top, nothing will. New York State needs to pass its own version. I've introduced a bill in the City Council along with my good colleague Tish James to have the city do this. It hasn't gotten to the floor either, and you can ask yourself why it hasn't gotten to the floor. There are powerful interests at work, and they don't want you to have your say. I'm going to continue to fight for this community. I will stand with everyone here. I will make sure that no one forgets what happened and that the people who did this are held accountable. It is not about money. This is about the livelihoods, the building, the goodwill created in this community by these hardworking people that this government has taken for granted. I'll do it in the council, and I promise you when I go to Washington, I'll do it twice as hard there. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Irene Prestigiacomo. I own property in Willets Point that the city wants to take and hand over to a rich real estate developer, a practice that should be condemned by any American concerned with constitutional rights and the issue of income inequality. Since 2007, when we first heard about the mayor's plan to use eminent domain to take our property, members of Willets Point United have said that this is wrong, a plainly improper use of eminent domain, not for a public use, but to benefit a private real estate developer. Now, it is not just we in Willets Point who are saying this, and it is not just the 44 states that have already passed their own local laws to disallow this sort of eminent domain abuse who are saying it. Now the United States House of Representatives has spoken, and the House resoundingly supports what we have said all along, and the support cuts right across party lines. What exactly does the House think of this abuse of eminent domain for economic development purposes? In the law that it passed, it says that any state that allows it to occur should be punished by having all of its federal economic development funds withheld for 2 years. Make no mistake about it. What Mike Bloomberg is trying to do here at Willets Point has now been deemed inappropriate by the United States House of Representatives. It is he, not us, who is swimming against the tide and violating basic American principles. Let me add one important point here. Not only is the use of eminent domain at Willets Point wrong, but the manner in which the city has gone about trying to move this project forward has been blatantly discriminatory and patently illegal. for the city to use taxpayers' money to illegally have a local development corporation lobby for the project not only violates the law, but the due process rights of small property owners just like me and Janice and so many others. This whole smelly process is a poster child for why eminent domain should not be used to deprive small property owners of their rights. We will continue to fight the billionaire mayor, fronting for his rich friends tooth and nail. I also want to make sure that everyone here knows that both senators, Schumer and Gillibrand, were invited to be here today, but neither of them had the common courtesy to return our calls. That lets us know where they stand, not for the people, but for the 1% that fund their lavish campaigns. Thank you very much.
I am particularly upset at the prostitution of the time-honored concept of eminent domain. We all grew up understanding that government has the right to take private property for a public purpose, a school, transportation facilities, public buildings, not for private real estate development. In the case of Kelo versus City of New London, Connecticut, the United States Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision ruled a municipality could take private property for a real estate development. Parenthetically, that development never got built, and that property remains empty to date. Recently, the City of New London enacted a resolution apologizing to the homeowners that threw out of that property. Across this country, an uproar arose at what was clearly a wrong decision, and 44 or 45 states enacted legislation prohibiting the use of eminent domain for real estate development. Not surprisingly, New York was not one of those states because for too long, real estate interests and some politicians are bedded together. The U.S. House of Representatives, for the second time, recently with a voice vote approved a bill co-sponsored by Republican James Sensenbrenner and Democrat Maxine Waters called H.R. 1433, the Private Property Protection Act, that will make a serious inroad in restoring what we all know when eminent domain is to be utilized. I urge people to write to Senator Schumer and Gillibrand telling them they must vigorously support this bill, and failure to do so will be an issue in any campaign seeking their re-election. As to Senator Schumer, it is true his friends are Wall Street, hedge fund owners, and large real estate people. They have more money than Willets Point, but Willets Point has more voters. As to Senator Gillibrand, she should be told if she doesn't support this bill, ads will be taken upstate. Upstate people will not be happy with eminent domain taking their private property for a real estate developer.
I'd also like to acknowledge Janice Cerrone, who is the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit that is known as Cerrone versus City of New York. We're waiting for this case to be scheduled in the appellate division, and this is the direct challenge on a determination and findings that authorize the condemnation of Willets Point.
Good afternoon. My name is Marco Neira. I'm the president for the Small Business and Workers in Willets Point. I'm here to support United Association because if they stay over here, we can stay as a tenant and we can continue doing business in Willets Point. So I'm here to support them. And also I want to ask to the city, then please stop those harassment they're doing every single day to our business. Please stop harassing us, let us to work.
My name is Arturo Laya. I'm a businessman at Willets Point. I'm 16 years in this area, and I want to thank the Congress to support no eminent domain, especially in Willets Point. Eminent domain not supposed to be taking property from the people to give it to somebody else for favors. We are here suffering for more than 20 years the harassment of the city. Thanks to the Congress to take care of this and not to eminent domain. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Tana Kilapanji, and I just want to say that I'm thankful for Washington that they made up a law like this one where they could punish a state for if New York uses eminent domain. I'm thankful because there's like so many people here who have families and their families live off of Willets Point, and I just hope that the Senate approves of this.
Thank you very much for coming.